One of the strangest phenomena of the last 2 decades is this idea that you're selfish if you have children. Now, children are required for moving civilization forward. They carry on family legacy and culture. They fill gaps in the workforce. They care for their aging parents. And they add a lot of joy to life in the years in between. But suddenly, life has become very difficult for young families. Housing is unaffordable, food is expensive. Women are encouraged to wait to have children till past their prime childbearing years. And those who do have children are told they're responsible for the destruction of the climate. So this week, when Alberta Premier Danielle Smith said that she finds the message of the left bleak because of the young people who are choosing not to have kids, I say bravo. These are the types of conversations we should be having more of in politics. I'm Rachel Parker, and this is the Alberta Roundup. Okay, everyone, taking a look at our first story here, Alberta Premier Danielle Smith was once again on Dr. Jordan Peterson's podcast this week, and she told him she finds the message of the left bleak. Take a listen.
I find the message of the left so bleak. We have a whole generation of young people who've been brought up to believe that just the basic actions of human life are destroying the planet, acting as if there's no future for humanity, that there is no improvement that can be made, that there's too many humans on the planet. Young people who are choosing not to have kids because they're worried about what the future might hold. This is a very bleak vision. So it's interesting to me that somehow that, because it has that spiritual component, is so attractive to young people.
As I opened with, I couldn't agree more with the Premier, and I think these are really important conversations to be having, especially as we see the birth rate declining and we are importing more and more immigrants every year to fill the fact that Canadians aren't having kids anymore. We definitely need to begin counteracting that, and I think one of the things we can all do is scream from the rooftops how important and wonderful it is to have children. Taking a look at our next story here, Canada's premiers wrapped up the summer meeting of the Council of the Federation with calls on the federal government to once again collaborate with premiers and with provinces. The premiers of the 10 provinces and 3 territories were in Halifax for their 3-day gathering hosted by Nova Scotia Premier Tim Houston. The premiers said they discussed key priorities that includes housing, affordability, skills and training, strategic infrastructure, the future of energy, and emergency preparedness and response. Several of the premiers expressed frustration with what they say is a lack of teamwork with the federal government on important files. Alberta Premier Danielle Smith said that a lack of collaboration has resulted in the doubling up of services like dental care and farmer care. BC Premier David Eby said he and his counterparts have for years called on the federal government to meet with the Federation, but those calls so far have gone unanswered. Here's what Premier Houston had to say.
But we also, of course, talked a lot about the need for the federal government to respect our provincial jurisdiction. The current lack of collaboration from the federal government to the provinces and territories has resulted in missed opportunities, as we see federal programs that create duplicate processes that risk pitting provinces and territories, really Canadians, against one another. But really the big risk is just in not delivering on intended results. So there's a lot we can do to collaborate, because the current situation we have is not in the best interest of the Federation as a whole.
Taking a look at our next story here, a new Angus Reid poll on Confederation fairness says that Quebec takes more than it gives and Alberta gives more than its fair share. According to the poll, more Canadians believe that Quebec receives a disproportionate benefit from the nation, while Alberta is the province considered by most Canadians to get a raw deal, meaning that it gives more to the Federation than it receives. The poll found that 42% of Canadians said Quebec benefits disproportionately from its place in the nation. Conversely, 23% said Alberta gives more than it receives, 10 points higher than any other province. Moving into our controversy of the week, it is an exclusive from the Globe and Mail. Alberta cabinet ministers and government officials attended Stanley Cup playoff games in Edmonton as guests of a man whose company was involved in importing children's medicine from Turkey, while Alberta Premier Danielle Smith and her staff attended a separate game in Vancouver with tickets provided by a director of a provincial crown corporation, according to sources and attendees who spoke with the Globe and Mail. The government changed the ethics rules late last year to make it easier for politicians and their staff to accept gifts and tickets. Alberta Premier Danielle Smith attended a private box to watch an Edmonton Oilers playoff game in Vancouver and invited BC Premier David Eby to join her. A source said an Invest Alberta board member gave Miss Smith and her office the tickets. The Premier did not respond to multiple requests for comments. The Minister of Affordability and Utilities, Nathan Neudorf, told the Globe that he attended an Oilers playoff game in Edmonton as a guest of local businessman Sam Maraish. Maraish's company, MH Care Medical, was involved in Alberta's deal to import children's pain medication during a shortage. You guys might remember that Tylenol shortage back in 2022. Neudorf said he received clearance from the Ethics Commissioner before joining colleagues who included other ministers and government officials in the suite. He declined to name them, but he told the Globe, "I don't need to hide anything. I have no problem telling the truth." The United Conservative Party government passed legislation last year to make it easier for politicians and staff to accept gifts, benefits, tickets, and invitations. The legislation requires MLAs to disclose such tickets in certain circumstances, and also empowers the Premier's Chief of Staff, who is currently Marshall Smith, to determine what was acceptable for political employees. MH Care Medical is a medical supply and distribution company that was involved in the province's importation of children's pain medicine from Turkey, according to documents obtained through a Freedom of Information request. Only 30% of the drugs, which were manufactured by Atabay Pharmaceuticals, arrived, and just a fraction of those were used. Maraish did not return messages seeking comment from the Globe and Mail. The Premier traveled to Vancouver to watch a game in a box using tickets provided by the Invest Alberta director. The Premier, on May 10, posted a photo on social media of herself in a box with BC Premier David Eby and Vancouver Mayor Ken Sim when the Oilers played the Canucks. A source at Edmonton's Sam Jaber and his accounting firm, Jaberson and Associates, gave the Premier the tickets. Jaber sits on the board of Invest Alberta, a Crown corporation designed to promote, identify, and pursue investments in the province. He also did not respond to messages seeking comment. Okay, I just want to start by breaking down the story because there is so many moving parts and I think it is a bit complicated. So essentially, it appears that the Premier and her staff and ministers did not break ethics rules because they received a sign-off for these tickets from the Premier's Chief of Staff, Marshall Smith. Typically, there is a threshold. I believe it is $500. You're not allowed to accept gifts over $500. And if you do, you need the sign-off of the Chief of Staff. Marshall Smith signed off on all these individuals receiving these tickets. Now, when we look at the actual cost of the tickets themselves, the story doesn't say how much tickets were. I did talk to somebody who owns a box up in Edmonton at the Rogers Centre. They said during the playoffs, these tickets were going for about $33,000 for a whole box. So that included 10 sitting seats and 12 standing seats. So these tickets were in the thousands of dollars. In addition to the base cost of the tickets, there is a minimum catering fee. We could have been looking at about $50,000 all in for the cost of this experience. Now, as I mentioned, it appears that they've sort of avoided breaching ethics rules because they received the sign-off, but I think this is going to be a huge optics problem for the government because it sort of stinks of corruption considering the fact that the man who was purchasing these tickets for government ministers and government officials was someone who was part of the children's Tylenol deal back in 2022. You guys might remember the Alberta government inked a deal with a Turkish manufacturer for $80 million to receive their own supply of children's medication when there was that shortage. Most of that medication never arrived, and a lot of it that did arrive wasn't usable because it was the wrong size. And you might remember seeing those reports from hospitals saying that the children's medication was too big, so it was clogging the tubes, and they basically just didn't end up using it. So $70 million of that went to the pharmaceutical company Atabay, and the other $10 million was used for distribution costs. So the story doesn't say exactly how much Sam Marish's company received from that deal, but they did say that they filed an information request and confirmed that Mr. Marish's medical company was involved in that deal with children's medication, and now it was his company that was involved in that deal, and now he is giving out free tickets that would be in the thousands of dollars to members of the government and to their staff. So it certainly sort of gives you Alison Redford vibes when we look at just, the level of entitlement. I think it would have just been better for government officials to say no and to pass on this. I think when you're in politics, if you're ever in doubt, if it looks like you might be blurring lines, if you're in a gray area, better just to say no. I know that I would not have been able to afford these tickets, and I'm assuming most people at home who are feeling the effects of the inflation crisis that we're in, the affordability crisis that we're currently in, are also thinking to themselves, I would never have been able to afford this experience for myself and my family, and I certainly would have loved to have go and watched a Edmonton Oilers playoff games. Why is it that our politicians are able to afford these things that regular people can't? Not afford them, but why is it that they are being treated to this luxury lifestyle when people at home are suffering a lot of times because of government policies? Alberta Premier Danielle Smith hasn't done a lot to ease taxes. We still have the fuel tax. Taxes are still high. She still hasn't made the changes that she promised to personal income tax. So the story, it doesn't sit well with me. I don't think it will sit well with most of you. I'm hearing behind the scenes that this might just be the first of many stories. There might be more things coming out about what this scandal involved entirely. I'm going to not say anything about that further, but this is definitely something to watch in the weeks to come. And my question of the week for you all is, what do you think about this? Do you think it was right for ministers and for political staff to accept these tickets? Or do you think that they were in the wrong, even though they might not have technically breached ethics rules? Would it have been better for them to say no? Because it does look like there is something untoward happening here. And, it doesn't sit right with me. Does it sit right with you? Finally, moving into what we're watching in the weeks to come, the temperature is hot in Alberta right now, and we are going to have to keep our eye out on the wildfire situation unfolding in Alberta. Certainly doesn't look to be anywhere near as bad as it was last summer, but we know these things can change very quickly. There's around 150 wildfires burning in Alberta right now. The fire danger is similarly elevated in many areas of the province, and the majority falling under a very high danger with pockets of extreme fire danger. In a social media post this week, Alberta Wildfire says most new wildfires in July have been caused by lightning. Around half of wildfires this year are suspected to have been caused by human activity and 30% by lightning. About 20% remain under investigation. The largest wildfire in the province is one of two out-of-control wildfires in the Cattail Lake complex. About 200 firefighters and support staff, 10 helicopters, and 43 pieces of heavy equipment are working the complex. Okay, everyone, and finally, moving into our weekly comment roundup. Last week, we talked about a new program from the Alberta government that would provide a pathway to permanent residency for foreigners who want to come and police in Alberta. A lot of you thought that this wasn't a good idea. User Dan Popescu said, quote, "Good, Alberta first, jobs for Albertans first. No more foreign workers, no more Liberal or NDP voters from the East and Maritimes." This is something I think about a lot with just the level of people that are moving to Alberta, even just interprovincially, like not coming from outside of Canada, but coming from places like Ontario and BC, is if this is going to cause a big problem for Alberta as being traditionally one of the most, if not the most conservative province in Canada. I just wonder if these people who are moving here are going to realize that they're moving here for an Alberta advantage that exists because of the way that our politicians have governed thus far and how conservatively our politicians have governed. And a lot of times people don't recognize that. And I think if they don't recognize that in this case, it'll be a problem. It'll be a problem for Alberta politics in years to come. User @Rick Johnson said, "Hiring police before they are citizens is contrary to Robert Peely's principle of citizens in uniform. Quote, the police are the public and the public are the police. This just contributes to the us versus them dilemma." I think this is a really interesting point to raise, and it's one of the issues that I've always taken with the RCMP. If you really want to become a police officer in Ontario, it can be very hard to get into your local police force. It can be very difficult to get into the Ontario Provincial Police. So a lot of people will accept a tenure for a couple years in like a rural Alberta community with hopes of being able to get back to Ontario, to their community, after they have a couple years of policing experience under their belt. And then what you have happen is you have someone who has no real love of that community or even of the province governing and policing the people in that community. And I think it's just much better when you have people who are raised up in that community and understand what the area is like, understand what the people are like, because we need to kind of get back to community policing where the police really understand the community and want what's best for the community, as opposed to they're simply filling a quota or they're just blindly following orders. And, obviously, there's circumstances where maybe there's no one in that specific community who want to be police. But as I said last week, I think that just goes back to let's get the conversation started earlier in schools. And really tell kids, these are all the options for you when you graduate college or when you even graduate high school. Not everyone needs to go to university. Not everyone needs to go into the trades. There's still other options in between. And I just think a lot of young people aren't aware of how good a policing job is because of the high salary and also the full benefits and pension package that it comes with. These are actually really highly coveted jobs, especially right now with the affordability crisis that we're experiencing. And I think the fact that we apparently don't have enough people applying for policing, which is still mind-boggling to me, speaks to a lack of education with our young people. Okay, and just going to read one more comment on this topic. This is from Grant the P. Worth. He said, quote, "At no point should non-citizens have authority over citizens. They don't know the laws of the land as they have never lived in it, thus they will not enforce them properly. Imagine getting someone from a country where rape is a gray area, and so they treat it as such here and not with the fervor that it requires. Leaving it up to the courts to decide will leave many people marginalized and forced to suffer through a judicial process when they are not guilty of anything. This is a recipe for disaster and shouldn't be acknowledged." I think this just really adds to the comment that I said before about people understanding what is important to a culture in a given area, and that can go from something as large as a country to a province to the specific culture in a community, and knowing the needs and the laws and the rules and what's socially acceptable in a given community to best govern and to help move society forward. Okay, everyone, that's all we have time for today. If you support our work, you can do that over at www.donate.tnc.news. I hope that you guys have a great weekend. Don't forget to subscribe to True North and like this video. I'll see you all next week. God bless.